I know that this episode is going to be a game changer for many of you. It was for me. I got to interview Colette White, who's a gynecologist with special training in menopause care. And she has a deep passion for supporting women in Europe. And let me just say, the stuff that she taught us that you're going to get to listen to today has impacted my life directly. I immediately went to my gynecologist, shared the concerns and issues I was having, and was able to get the support that I needed. Thank goodness for this interview. So I'm quite confident you're going to find this episode to be really helpful in your own journey if you are starting out in perimenopause, are at the point of menopause and postmenopause. We're going to be talking about things like what are the hormonal shifts that are changing? How can we start to pay attention better to how it's changing because it's affecting our relationships and what we can do to strengthen our relationship during this normal phase of life. Colette combines safe, effective medical treatments with the principles of lifestyle medicine to empower women to navigate perimenopause and menopause with confidence and to build a strong foundation for long-term health and longevity. She's a mom of 3 as well, and she lives in Bonn, Germany, though she's originally from Belfast. So it's time to go grab that paper and pen. I'm not joking, y'all. Seriously, this is a game changer. Grab a warm drink and let's begin. Welcome to Relationship Reset, Reignite, Reconnect, Rebuild, the podcast for high-achieving couples who want to transform their relationship from surviving to thriving. I'm Katie Rössler, a relationship coach and counselor with over 15 years of experience helping busy, overwhelmed couples rebuild connection, trust, and intimacy. If you've been together for years and feel stuck on autopilot, disconnected and frustrated by constant miscommunication, you're in the right place. Each week, we'll explore practical tools, relatable stories, and strategies to help you reignite the spark, rebuild your bond, and create the relationship you've always dreamed of. Because no matter how long you've been together, it's never too late to hit reset. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into a topic that I know is near and dear for many of you, perimenopause and menopause, and the effects it has on our relationships. I've got Colette White, and she's going to be helping us to better understand what is actually perimenopause and menopause. How do we know that we're in it? When does it start? How does it affect women? And how do we strengthen our relationship through it? So Colette, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kitty, for asking me. I'm delighted to be here and discuss this topic.
So share with us a little bit about yourself, what's your background, and who do you tend to help?
Sure, I'm a gynecologist trained in the UK, and I have lived now in Germany with my family for 9 years. And I did advanced training in the management of menopause, and I offer a private medical practice managing menopause and perimenopause symptoms for women throughout Germany and Europe.
Excellent. I have to ask this question because someone who is a counselor and licensed in her home country and moving to Germany where you are not licensed, you're not seen as licensed. How has it been that transition of working in the UK and being in Germany, as well as the wealth or lack of education around perimenopause and menopause? What have you found?
The transition to living in Germany, we could take a whole podcast on. Coming with 3 children and myself and my husband, it became clear really initially that their needs were going to take precedent. And so that's what happened. Then came Brexit, COVID, et cetera, and we were lucky. I was able to support the family that way. And then my own journey with perimenopause began, and I had a rather awkward conversation with my gynecologist when I asked for hormones, or I suggested that I could use hormones, and she said, "You're too young. Don't you know that? You're a gynecologist." And it was a rather awkward conversation. And then through talking to friends and just kind of generally looking at how it was in society, I realized there was still a lot of an attitude that hormones were really quite dangerous and only to be used in extreme circumstances and for a short amount of time. After my training, I know that to not be the case. And certainly for myself, I was always of the opinion that I was going to look out for symptoms and get treatment as soon as possible because I know the health benefits, not the symptom benefits, but also the long-term health benefits of them. So this was why then what inspired me to open the practice. And I see a lot of women coming who get fantastic care. The medical care in Germany is fantastic. But in this one area, it seems to be that the message hasn't quite made it into the practices of doctors who are on the ground, so to speak, that there is plenty of room for treatment in this situation.
I've heard that on repeat as well, that there's a real struggle to be believed and to be listened to. So let's dive into what exactly is perimenopause and what is menopause.
Very important place to start. And it's very important as well when it comes into believing women, because another thing is that message hasn't got quite through quite how early these symptoms can start. So firstly, if we take menopause, that is when we have had no period for a year. So it's a diagnosis kind of in retrospect. And once you're menopausal, you're menopausal then for life, you're postmenopause. And the period up until that is called perimenopause. In Europe and in the UK, in the States, the average age for menopause is about 51 to 52, and normal is considered anywhere from 45 years older. It happens a little earlier in Afro-Caribbean communities and Latino communities, and again, even earlier than in Indian subcontinent. But if we take 45 as a normal age for it to happen, then symptoms of perimenopause can happen 7 to 10 years before menopause happens. So from our late 30s, it's quite normal then to be having symptoms that are because of the hormonal changes and are due to perimenopause.
How does this affect women who have children later in life, whether it be they start in their mid 30s and older, or because of using IVF and things? How do we see hormone shifts or those who go straight into menopause, right? Because of that 45 to 51 kind of age range. What have you noticed that how it impacts them?
What we've seen in the recent past is a lot of women having their babies later and later. So starting with their family, between 31 and 35 years old, and even then having their last children into their 40s. And so that area between pregnancy and perimenopause, menopause can be very blurred. So it is still possible, absolutely, to conceive, whether naturally or with IVF, right up to menopause, and in fact with treatment beyond your own body's capability. But we see then a lot that women are raising potentially toddlers, but certainly older children, teenagers, and also experiencing their own hormonal shift. So it's quite common now to have in one household a mother experiencing perimenopause or menopause and teenage children with their own hormonal shifts, which can lead to chaos.
Oh, yes. And I can imagine then for the partner who is male, they're sort of sitting back going, okay, how do I deal with this? Before we get into how partners can start to support each other better and communicate better during this time, what are some of the symptoms that are actually perimenopause and menopause? Because online and social media world, they like to make everything seem like it's a symptom and how horrible it is. And oh my gosh. And it makes you scared to go through this phase or to dread it. So, what are symptoms and what can we go, okay, these are normal, these are concerning, or this is just getting older?
It's a good question. If I had an easy answer, I'd be a very rich woman. So first of all, to explain the hormones that we're talking about when we talk about hormones. So women are producing every month estrogen and progesterone, and it's usually in some kind of cyclical nature. So one a month is typical, but of course, every woman's slightly different. But for the large part, it's relatively constant and regular throughout our fertile life. And what happens in perimenopause is we're beginning to run out of eggs. And so it's harder for our body to, the hormones from our brain to convince our ovaries to release an egg. And so it has to work even harder. And in that process, it results in extreme variations of hormones in a much more irregular pattern. And that change is what leads to the symptoms. So that's of estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone usually falls first. And the typical hormones, symptoms then are of menstrual irregularity, heavier bleeding or infrequent bleeding, or anxiety and sort of inward unsettledness, sleep problems, potentially low mood, irritability. They're commonly associated with low progesterone. But having said that, it's possible to not have any menstrual irregularity and still be in perimenopause. That happens to some women. And then the more typical symptoms would be hot flushes, changes where you feel like you aren't able to maintain your body weight in the way that you had been once before. It maybe takes more effort to lose some pounds. And specifically, and very important to realise that there are noticeable changes to the vagina vulva area during the perimenopause and menopause. Well, these can happen at any time in life, in particular in the postpartum period. when women are breastfeeding, you can have a situation of hypoestrogenism in the vulva and vagina, and it affects the bladder as well. And that can lead to discomfort, dryness, more prone to infections, whether it's with thrush infections or bladder infections, and also a decreased sensation in the clitoris and the vulva. And all that can contribute to a reduction of libido. About 80% of women at this phase in their life will report a decreased in sexual desire. And that might be a hormonally related issue, but also a physical issue due to the consequence of hormones. So there isn't one cell really in the body that isn't affected by the change in hormones, and it can cause so many symptoms, and one can play on to the next. In particular, if you're not sleeping well, for example, then you're more likely to be irritated. Testosterone is another very important hormone that women actually have, isn't so well known. We do have testosterone and we rely on it a lot. It is reducing in women since we're in our sort of mid-20s. So it's not new that it's reducing in menopause, but it does decrease in menopause. And along with the change in progesterone and estrogen, it can contribute to a loss of a wish for intimacy with our partners. And we find also that when we substitute that for women, that they notice also that it helps with energy levels and brain function and potentially even maintaining a normal weight as well. So it's another very important hormone. And as for, to answer your question specifically, knowing what is menopause or perimenopause related and what is age related, it really is about taking the time to discuss your symptoms with somebody who is familiar with what is, knowing what you were like before. And for that purpose, journaling or keeping a record of your symptoms can be just really powerful, not only for you to see it in black and white and to see how it changes, but to bring it to your care provider, your doctor, and to show them, look, these are the symptoms. This is how it's been changing over the months, and this is how I feel now. And we talk about a trial of treatment, essentially. And so a trial of hormone therapy and identifying what improves and acknowledging the fact that not everything might be related to the hormone change.
You know, I think about the couples I've worked with, and when this phase of life comes up for the woman, there is a feeling from the man like, these are just excuses. You used to be fine. You used to be so athletic. You used to want to do these things. It's hard for them to wrap their mind around the shift and change and how natural and normal it is, because we're not talking about it. And men especially are not educated about it, right? These are not discussions we have for women. Men are definitely not having them. How can men better be a support for their partners through this? And obviously we're talking about heterosexual relationships, but how do they start to, it sounds bad, but believe and better understand what's happening to their partners' bodies?
Yeah, I see that too. And I find it very sad when, women, when they come with these problems, they often also go to the health provider and aren't almost believed either. And it's very, very challenging situation for women to be in. So like I said, there isn't one part of the body that isn't affected by these changes of hormones. And what's really important is to believe the women that this is something out of their control and that it affects everywhere, and that the changes in particular to the vulva and vagina are visible. For want of a better word, the vulva of a young woman is usually quite plump. And when we get age and estrogen levels decline, it gets thinner and the skin almost more crepey. And so that's easily damaged with intercourse. And that is a real and genuine fact, which happens to women. And of course, if intercourse is painful, then you're going to be more reluctant to have it. And some women, in fact, will develop urinary tract infections more commonly, and that might be an association with intercourse. And if you associate getting sick with the act of intercourse, which happens to a lot of women, they're obviously going to be put off. So I would say believing them and educating themselves in exactly how this time can affect them. One thing I didn't touch on, which it's a good time, is that when we're intimate with our partners, we produce oxytocin. And that is also the hormone that for women encourages them to be maternal and to be caring and to be sort of in a relationship with people, be it their partner or their child or friends or whoever. And that's a very important hormone for building that connection. And when we start to reduce the estrogen levels, that has an interaction in the brain and how we process oxytocin. And so it's hard to quantify, but it can also happen to women that they start to feel less connection with their partner, feeling of uncertainty about even liking them. And that is kind of out of their control. It is a hormonal change that's happening in the brain. And so it's about being aware of that. Again, in that circumstance, you could, if you were the woman experiencing those things, think, well, how was it before? Is this a new thing? And maybe think to yourself, this is something that might pass. But the communication with the partner and the partner believing them and understanding that, these psychological and hormonal and physical changes are not within their control, but also that it doesn't have to last forever. Good management of this situation could mean that at the other side, lots of women talk about a freedom. They don't no longer have to worry about contraception, for example. And lots of women report increase in sexual desire and a sort of willingness to experiment, et cetera, that is something that they hadn't experienced before. So there is definitely the possibility and the hope of improvement and a good positive change on the other side.
Will you talk briefly about how women can support their bodies when they're feeling that vaginal dryness, when they're struggling? Because I know there are things that we can do to support our bodies. I often talk with women and go I do want to have sex, but it is painful. And because of that, now I'm afraid to even be touched by him. But they want to shift it. So in case their doctors are not believing them or not as educated, what can they get to support themselves?
Sure. Well, I should always start with the basics, which are healthy diet, exercise, and relaxation techniques. And I can't underestimate the difference that those pillars of health make, should they be an issue. And stopping smoking, for example, cutting down on alcohol, all of these things really make a difference to how you experience this phase. But specifically this area, I should start with hygiene, so treatment, daily management of the vulva and vagina. So not using perfumed soaps. And often you see things that are marketed for this area. There's a lot of trust in women, but if they have scents or perfumes in them, just do not go near them. You can use products that are specifically for moisturizing the area. Again, the more basic, the better. And even just coconut oil. A good quality coconut oil is very good for moisturizing the area. Using toys like, in particular, bullet vibrators. They help stimulate blood flow and blood supply to the area and help strengthen the skin. And that can help improve sensation and also sort of the durability and strength of the skin, which can be very important. And then also, more specifically, estrogen replacement in that area is very safe. There is really no woman and that includes women who have had breast cancer, with a close discussion with your doctors and your oncologists, but there are very few women who shouldn't use this cream. It is very safe. It is a very low dose of estrogen and it's not absorbed into the skin. It doesn't affect your uterus or your breast tissue. And I'd highly recommend to consider using estrogen cream in the vulva and vagina area. And there is also a preparation which is estrogen cream mixed with DHEA, so the precursor to testosterone. And it can be used in a preparation in that area. And it treats sort of twofold issues. One, the lack of estrogen, but also it can help stimulate the tissues to be more receptive to intimacy. And so that can be a very effective treatment. And also, just from the point of view of intimacy, taking the pressure off the act of penetration can also really help in this circumstance, moving it to massages or other ways to show affection and care and taking all the pressure away from necessarily an intimate act always involving penetration.
Yeah, definitely. I often tell my clients, if you want sex on Friday, you start on Monday with the flirting and the massages and the emotional touch, and none of it being I want sex, we should have sex on Friday, but with the desire to increase a sense of comfort and closeness and connection so that you're more primed and excited, both of you, for what's to come. It's no longer the days where it's let's do it right now.
Yeah, I know.
I'm sorry, I have to turn off my brain. I've got to take care of the kids. I've got to pick this up. That's not how women's brains work. And they never really worked that way, but now especially. So I'm glad you brought up some tools. And I was just thinking how beautiful for a couple to use some of those tools together. The coconut oil, the vibrator, of a way of just going hey, we're helping your body, but we're helping our relationship. And it doesn't have to be for sex. It can just be also for comfort and enjoyment.
Absolutely. Like the act of using the vibrator, for example, is a medicinal act. It is literally helping the skin repair itself. And I didn't mention lubricant. I should have said that, but implied it. But I would say use it before you need it. Go ahead and just get lubricant and use it. Don't wait until you've had an episode where you realize, oh, things feel a bit dry. Just go ahead and use it in advance. You can't really have too much.
Definitely. You referenced a bit to the fact that when we have these shifts in oxytocin, for a woman, it makes us actually really start to question our partner, our dedication to the relationship, all of these things. Can we go into the challenges around making big decisions for our relationship, for our careers, for our life, and how that also can interplay with kind of the financial then pressure that we feel?
Yeah, unfortunately, the rate of divorce is increasing in this age group and is relatively high. And that can bring with it a lot of issues for women. And in particular, that also in the menopause, 1 in 10 women will consider giving up their job because they don't feel able to do it. And I've certainly had really successful businesswomen come and say, I have been running this business for 30 years, and all of a sudden I feel like I feel like I need to quit. I feel like before I walk into the boardroom, and the transformation when they start treatment is really remarkable. And if a woman at this stage of their life is thinking about giving up their job, a certain amount of financial insecurity comes with that. And so if you time that as well, the potential breakdown of your relationship and the division of assets, etc., there is the risk that women will become financially worse off or financially in difficult situations. And that unfortunately does happen. Back to the point about how the change in estrogen affects the way oxytocin works in our brain, I think I would say, well, first of all, women should be able to trust themselves, but be accepting that things are happening in your brain that might be making things worse than they really are, or not how you would truly feel them should those changes not be happening in your brain. And so I would say be aware of that. Again, I think journaling can help a lot here to sort of record how was I feeling, 5 years ago, whatever, or a year ago, even, or 6 months ago, and to document it and speak to somebody you trust, whether that be a friend or a counselor, about how you're feeling and get their opinion. I think at this stage, at any stage, we shouldn't expect our partner to provide us with every single aspect of emotional help that we need. And often it is useful to look outside the relationship for advice. So I would say not to make big life decisions without really thinking about the facts about what's happening in your body and about what that will mean for your life as a whole.
I have noticed a tendency during this phase of life where the anxiety is higher, but the rage and anger as well, right? You talked about like it's like a teenager in puberty, and then the women in the house who are going through perimenopause, it's quite similar. And often what I'm teaching clients is how to self-regulate and bring their nervous system to a more neutral place so that they can think a little more clearly about what it is they want. Because you're right, it might be 5 years from now, you feel totally different in your relationship. But how do you maintain in those 5 years? Because nobody wants anybody to have to suffer or struggle. So I'm glad that you brought that up, that, to seek out advice and support instead of feeling like you have to make this decision all alone.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that women hormonally imbalanced and aren't to be trusted. That's not the case, but there are hormonal changes happening. We accept that a teenager's going to kick off, and you accept, you give them grace, and you make sure they're fed, and you do these things. And it's something similar for women who are entering into menopause. We need to have the basics covered and some support to allow us to, experience this time, because it can be very disconcerting. A very common thing women say is, I just don't feel like myself. And also some women come thinking, worried that they are heading into dementia because they forget their words and they feel confused. And that can be a very worrying situation for women. So it's a huge relief when they see that it's this normal change in your life, and it's very easily managed with replacing the hormones that we've lost.
Yeah, definitely. Let's transition now into how do we strengthen our relationship during the season of our lives? Those of us who are like, okay, I'm in it for the long haul. What can we start to talk with our partners about? Or what can we do differently? What are some suggestions you have for us?
Yeah, I guess on the part of both partners, I would say communicate, 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 explain how you're feeling, what's going on, say I'm having an off day or I don't know why, but I'm just not feeling myself or I'm very irritated. If you just say I'm really easily irritated, I think sometimes that just takes the electricity out of the air and your partner knows to, and also you can feel a bit of relief that you've given that warning. And education on both partners, the woman who's experiencing it and the partner who sort of is standing by to watch it, seeking out sources of education. Social media is a great place. Of course, there is a lot on social media and it can get confusing, but there are enough good sources that can be a good place for both partners to seek help. And sometimes I've had women bring their partners to speak to me during a consultation, and they have always been open-eyed in all the different ways. Their partner can be affected, tiredness, sleep, and also aches and pains in the joints. If you're feeling generally sore from head to toe and you're tired, you're not likely to be feeling very like being intimate. And I can see the partners saying that, oh, this is crazy, and often they leave kind of a little bit militant, like determined that they're going to spread the word about what women have to go through. That can be helpful to come together to a discussion. And you have mentioned journaling again, and I think that's a place where it can be really helpful.
I think also you've referenced to making sure you believe your partner. And on both sides, often when we're in, this phase of perimenopause, we're going through so much, right? That the idea of having to stop and think what it must be like for our partner is tough. But for both of you to step inside the other shoes and go, man, what would it feel like to not feel like myself anymore on a daily, regular basis for years? And what would it be like to watch my partner go through that and not understand? Because you don't see outward major physical changes. You just see some shifts and you see a big mood change. And being really understanding. And you mentioned the word grace. We give grace to teenagers. Why not give grace during this period of change within ourselves? And also to our partner who's trying to navigate it too on the outside and see, okay, how do I support you? I'm not sure. That I think I've shared with you before that I have a couple I work with who they're always kind of like, is the porcupine out today? Like, can I come and hug you? Or like, am I going to get poked? And sometimes we need funny code words to laugh through this process of, yeah, she's out. That the grumpy porcupine is out. Like, give me some space when I feel like it's calmer, I'll come and hug you and you'll know. These are ways that we can join together through this phase rather than feel like we're pushing each other apart. And I'll share from a counseling standpoint, one of the biggest things we can do to damage our relationship, and this is speaking to the male partner in a heterosexual relationship, is to avoid and pull away and to go, I'll just wait till this phase is over. Because the more you pull away, the more your partner feels this anxiety inside as well and builds up this sense of, I don't need him anymore because he's not going to even be there for me in this. And you've said it, our mind is already kind of working in a different way. We have to be really mindful of that. But don't avoid your partner in this phase, no matter how, quote, scary, right? Or rageful or angry they get. Be willing to come towards them and say, what is it I can do to support you right now? I don't like how you're speaking to me. I don't like that you're yelling to talk or whatever. Like, you're allowed to have those boundaries.
Yeah.
But I want to help you. Make sure you guys are coming together to have these, like you said, you need to have these discussions. You also referenced better education. Do you have some good websites or social media, doctors or influencers on social media that you could say, hey, these are some good resources for both partners to check out?
So sites that I very much trust are Dr. Mary Claire Haver. She's a gynecologist from the States and is a urologist in the States as well.
Dr. Kelly Casper.
That's the one.
Yes, Dr. Kelly Casperson.
And then there's also a gynecologist in the UK, Dr. Louise Newson, who's very active in the space. They're all we call board certified or qualified doctors in their area and have taken on this space in a big way and have lots of research themselves published. And then with regards couples therapy and sexual health, it's Dr. Karen Gurney. She's otherwise known as the Sex Doctor on Instagram. She's written books about the gender gap in relationships and about keeping sort of sex life alive, in particular after kids. And she's very impartial as such and gives very wise advice, in my opinion. And then a good site, it's not specifically for menopause, but it's just for sexual health in general, is omgyes.com. That's a site run by a sort of normal people explaining sexual desire and giving very, very practical tips that women and men can follow. Yeah, and something occurred to me there that I wanted to say when we were talking about partners educating themselves. And I can imagine for a man, a partner who's a partner of between 35 and 40, they might feel very awkward bringing up the possibility of menopause to somebody at that age, that they might think that could be insulting. And I think we need to get over that idea, really normalize it, get rid of the stigma that this is what happens to older women with grey hair who are very definitely old and finished. It is women of our age. It's young women who are vital, who have still got a big, long life ahead of them, full of life and ideas. And yes, it is something that's associated with getting old, but we're lucky to be able to be getting old in that way. And as long as we approach this time with knowledge about what might happen and the tools to manage it, then it can be just seen as a good opportunity and doesn't have to be an insult or something to be ashamed of.
Absolutely. I agree with that. To wrap us up, I always make sure at the end of my podcast episodes, there's some homework or a tool that they can walk away with. What would be something you would give maybe to the woman or to the couple as well, as kind of a homework item to start doing?
Journaling, without a shadow of a doubt. It is so useful, as you know yourself, if you're going to be doing a gratitude journal, then it's so beneficial for your mental health. But also it is so beneficial in this circumstance to document your symptoms so that you can then bring this to the practitioner that you see when you're asking for help, but also then so that you can, if you do start treatment, look and see how your symptoms have responded. There's nothing more powerful because, trust me, we all forget. In 6 months down the line, we forget that actually we weren't sleeping so well or that hot flushes really were as bad as we thought they were, And so while it's documented, that can be a really good way to follow the response to symptoms and help guide your treatment. So journaling would be my big.
And that's something you can do with your partner because your partner is on the outside seeing shifts in you too that you may not be paying attention to. So it's great to just do a check-in and say, hey, honey, anything you want me to journal about today? Anything you want me to add to the list? And if they're like, you were really reactive about carrots. And you're like, oh God, you're right. I forgot about that. Right. Or like, you cried at this commercial that never make you cry. Like, you're right. So sometimes they can be a good holder of the day's memories that we maybe have forgotten. So I like the idea of doing that together too.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
If people want to connect with you, learn more from you, and potentially work with you, especially if you're here in Europe, how can they do that?
Yeah, sure. My website is www.menocare.de and I'm on Instagram at menocare_de.
Excellent. I will make sure all the links for how to contact you are down below in the show notes, as well as the educational material you send Dr. Karen Gurney, Dr. Mary Claire, Dr. Kelly Catherine. You gave us a lot. I'll make sure those are below too. So it's really easy for the listener to find. Colette, thank you so much for taking the time to educate us, to open our eyes to the realities of perimenopause and menopause, but also just normalize it. I think we need to have this conversation more and more out in the public sphere to help couples recognize they're not alone. And this doesn't have to be a time that they assume will just end their relationship.
No, absolutely. There is safe and effective treatment and it should be available to pretty much everybody. So there's no need to fear. Just be prepared.
Thank you, Colette. And dear listener, we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Relationship Reset. If you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend who might need it too. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast. It helps more couples discover these tools to rebuild their connection too. And be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. It's gonna be a good one. Your relationship is worth the work, and the rewards, totally worth the effort. See you next week.